China and the U.S. are struggling to finalize the trade talks to get a deal before the deadline. Well, the DPRK has cast an unexpected curveball in the warning on Wednesday. It criticized the U.S. joint military drills with the ROK and threatened to cancel the summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong next month. With just less than a month left, is the Trump-Kim summit falling apart? Are we seeing new uncertainties on the Korean Peninsula? And what are the hopes for a satisfying deal being reached between the U.S. and China ahead of the June deadline? And joining me here for some discussion is Charles Liu, founder and chairman of Capital, and Mr. Einar Tongen, our current affairs commentator. We'll be also joined in the second half by Professor Carl Fei of Finland's Aalto University and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Those are topics. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So let's talk about Korean Peninsula situation. People were expecting things will turn for the better because there's going to be a summit between Kim and Donald Trump. But all of a sudden, North Korea said the joint military drills, which they said were not a big problem, now they consider a provocation. So could this thing fall apart, Charles?
I think on both sides, if you talk about logic, they need to have the summit and they need to have some successful results out of the summit. Donald Trump is
You mean for both sides, North
for both
Korea
sides.
and the U.S.?
Yes, yeah, both sides.
Who needed more?
Well, Donald Trump is on a personal basis. North Korea is also on a family basis. I think both need it. But I think what happened is this is just a pretext. The real issue is the demands that were published in the press that the U.S. side had put up to the North Koreans regarding the summit. For example, all nuclear warheads have to move off the territory of North Korea. 1,000 engineers and scientists who are involved in the nuclear program has to move out of North Korea. These things which weren't known before, once put to the North Korean government, makes it very difficult for them to continue. The question is whether or not the U.S. administration is doing what they do best, namely, demand the world, set a really high bar, and negotiate down, like the aluminum.
So, Einar, the North Koreans are resetting expectations for the summit for the rest of the world. Is it what is happening?
Well, yeah, I mean, this unilateral get rid of your nukes is not going to work. I mean, obviously there are trust deficits. When Bolton, John Bolton goes on Sunday morning news and starts talking about instituting the same process with Libya, I mean, that didn't work out too well.
The same thing will happen in North Korea.
Okay.
What happened in Libya?
Yeah. Well, no. He said this is the model we should use. Okay. Now, from Kim Jong-un's perspective, that didn't end up very well for Gaddafi. So, from his perspective, he's wondering, and they said that they really don't like Bolton, and there's no reason they should. Now, what's behind this? And I think there's some feeling among the neocons and the mercantilists that today the U.S. is strong. In 20 years from now, because of the demographics and how things are moving, the U.S. will not be as strong as it is today. So this is why you're seeing this kind of urgency to really push very, very hard on almost every issue. I can't think of anybody who Donald Trump isn't fighting with, whether it's an ally.
So you're saying Donald Trump is thinking long term?
No, I don't think Donald Trump is. He's extremely situational. I'm saying that there are other people, the neocons that surround him, Bannon and Bolton and all of these types of people, Lighthizer. They really believe that if the U.S. is going to, and Navarro, if the U.S. is going to maintain its political, economic, and military edge, it must strike now. It's a zero-sum type of a situation. This is unless we bolster our existing domination, we will lose it.
Do you think North Koreans will denuclearize in any sense?
No, not in the sense. They'll say there's an iron-bound commitment to denuclearize. But
they have dismantled the nuclear test sites.
No, the nuclear test site.
Under the witness of journalists.
Yes, but that's kind of like the cooling tower that they blew up, just before the last talks that they had with the U.S. It was defunct, and so is this nuclear testing site. What happened is during the last bomb, it was a little bit heavier than they thought, and it collapsed the tunnels, so they can't use it anymore anyway. So getting rid of it is not the issue, but really it's about time scale. The U.S. is saying we want something 6 months to a year, and that's our bright red line. And for North Korea, I think they're thinking more like 10, 20 years. We say we will denuclearize when our economy is up to it. That's why they keep saying.
If that's the case, what North Koreans are prepared to give to Donald Trump in Singapore?
I think they've already indicated a freeze on the nuclear and the intercontinental ballistic missile program. A freeze means no further development, but it doesn't mean that you move all your nuclear warheads out of the country.
In exchange for what from America?
For removal of sanctions, first and foremost.
And do you think it's likely to happen, that Donald Trump will say lifting of sanctions in exchange for freeze?
No, I think we shouldn't be looking at the real substance of the discussion. Because
but isn't it what it's all about?
There's so much.
This is optics.
It's all optics. It's all optics. Because what Donald Trump would like, he was so proud that people have named him as a possible recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize if he pulls this off. This is a big thing for him. For the midterm elections is a big thing. And for Mr. Kim.
But the world is watching what is really going on.
The world can watch, and the press can come out and comment on how this is all substance, no substance, all optics. It doesn't matter to him. It doesn't matter to him because, for example, on the pulling out of the Iran deal, that's in direct violation of Security Council resolution. Does he care? He doesn't care. His base doesn't care.
But
and most American voters don't care.
If it is also,
they don't understand.
It is an issue of optics. In what way can President Trump package this as kind of success if North Koreans does not give up this nuclear program?
We stopped the further development of nuclear weapons in the intercontinental.
You mean a freeze?
A freeze. Because you can say stop development of nuclear weapons. Secondly, intercontinental ballistic missiles. So they're within range of Japan and South Korea, but as long as it doesn't hit New York and Washington, it's okay.
And this is what Japan is afraid of. This is why they've been elevating their diplomacy. They have been contacting South Korea. They want to say, look, we need to be on the same level. We cannot allow Donald Trump to sell us downriver, literally by saying no intercontinental and everything's fine.
And do you think Americans will lift sanctions on North Korea because of the freeze of the nuclear programs this time?
No, I don't think so.
Then
I think he needs something
what
stronger.
What can Kim Jong-un walk away from this meeting with?
He's already walked away with it. The optics he went from a pariah, all right, this person who was accused of doing terrible things, who had massive sanctions, who's been a rogue nation, to now actually having the best PR game in this particular issue. He's the one who seems like he has offered things. As you pointed out, he says, oh, I'm destroying my nuclear test site. He handed over 3 American citizens over to the White House. So he had that whole stage performance with the South Korean presidents where, he's kind of jumping back and forth across the line. He's smiling. He seems like a very benign character.
And people also say he's playing the China cards because in just a matter of a month he's met Chinese president 2 times. What kind of a China card is he playing?
Well, I think he's trying to cause, first off, I mean, China welcomes it because the interests of China are not in having a nuclear arms race in Asia, which could be the result if North Korea continued its program. So China is looking for some sort of things. I think in the end, because China or somebody is going to have to step up and put down the security guarantees. Because the U.S., I mean, would you trust the U.S. in his position? Especially when John Bolton, who's the advisor president, saying, oh, let's do this.
The Iran deal, which is international
Iran deal, but Iraq, all of these things, Libya, how can you possibly say, yes, I trust you? You don't obey international laws, you violate UN conventions, and you don't seem to care. So from that point of view, I think down the line, when things start to get serious, it'll have to be multi-party.
Kim Jong-un is hedging the risk. risks.
He's hedging, and he's also making the U.S. nervous. The more he visits Xi Jinping, the more nervous Donald Trump gets, because he's trying to figure it out. Now, add to another thing. All of a sudden, there's a high-level envoy coming from India. India has drifted away. I don't think. Yes, there was an incident where Donald Trump was making fun of Modi over this motorcycle issue, Harley Davidson, and he was doing it in front of groups. This does not sit well with a leader like that.
From the American perspective, are they combining the two issues together? Because there is trade talks in Washington between Chinese and Americans, and there's going to be a summit between Kim and Trump. Is Trump considering...
Trump describes himself as the most incredible deal maker of the century.
So
he sees everything as
he's combining the two issues.
Yeah, he's the most humble.
He's right. He sees everything as deal making. It's just like on the ZTE thing, which we'll talk about later, but the ZTE thinks, oh, this is going to be part of the great trade deal. But all his people said, no, ZTE has nothing to do with trade. It's a judicial issue. So how can it be part of a trade deal? Today, this was yesterday and today. So he sees everything as deal making, and he thinks that
so everything can put on the table as a bargaining chip.
As bargaining chip.
Including Taiwan.
Including Taiwan.
Yeah. He thinks everything is a chip to get what he wants, whether it's trade or security.
All right. We'll be talking more about the Sino-U.S. trade and economic relationship later on in this program. Don't go away. We'll be right back. And to talk about U.S.-China relations, we're joined by Professor Carl Fei from Finland's Aalto University and the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and also Charles Liu, founder and chairman of How Capital. Let's talk about what is going on in Washington. The USTR is now having a hearing on the administration's plan to impose tariffs on Chinese imports, more than 1,300 Chinese imports. At the same time, the U.S. and Chinese negotiators are talking about whether they can have a trade deal. Is the right context to have talks right now?
Well, this is a requirement in the U.S. process when one can come up with suggestions, when the president can come up with suggestions such as tariffs, there has to be a possibility for companies to make comments. So now they've put in written comments, and I think there are nearly 2,000 written comments that have come forward.
But the Chinese will feel they're under the pressure to enter into negotiations with American counterparts.
Well, maybe, but there actually are comments from both sides. I mean, it seems more of the companies are commenting against the U.S. tariffs and suggesting most of the U.S. companies
so the pressure
they don't
is on
want
the U.S. side.
Yes, actually, it's more pressure on the U.S. Side, and perhaps thus not coincidental that these aren't televised. But you've seen comments from people from Microsoft, from stores such as Walmart.
The National Retailers Association.
National Retail Association, the biggest association of retailers in the U.S. has come out against this. I mean, really, the major giants of the U.S. industry are saying, President Trump, please listen and reconsider this.
So is it the conventional wisdom that the American administration is under more pressure from the business circle to buck?
Well, I think this is very, very typical of what the Trump administration has done, is to come out with a really grand, blow-it-all-away scheme and then negotiate down. This is what they did with the iron and aluminum tariffs, where now almost everybody is on the exceptions list. But before the announcement, Wilbur Ross very clearly stated there'll be no exemptions. So every single thing that they've done is make a big story, catch the eyeballs, get people in the base, seem to be happy with his
But what
delivering.
are the terms if they want to have a negotiation framework?
You put tariffs on, first and foremost, what that does is...
$1,500 billion?
What you end up with is actually destroying consumption power of the U.S. consumer, because all the prices go up. And more than that, at the same time you're demanding that the Chinese don't buy your technology products.
Which is contradictory.
Which is contradictory. And then at the same time you're demanding reduction by $100 billion per year on the trade deficit, which is, again, totally ridiculous. So I think it's, again, big thunder and lightning. We won't see many raindrops coming down.
What will be the Americans' terms if there isn't any kind of deal?
Yes.
Because according to U.S. Ambassador to China, Terry Bradstad, the two countries are still far apart on resolving the trade frictions. How far apart?
Well, they are really far apart right now, but I fully agree that this is sort of optics and advertising, and Trump really sets his policy to get PR and attention, and this is what he's gotten now. And
so you're saying he's not serious about it?
Look, he's serious that he wants a change in U.S.-China trade. And let's be clear,
how?
Most U.S. companies want to change also. However, it's probably a little bit exaggerated at the moment. So how? First of all, there are a number of steps that the Chinese government is honestly already taking. And I think the greatest hope, I mean, the real question is, this week, now in Washington, can something concrete come out, right? This is really needed from both sides. And I think one possibility might be being a little more specific, for example, about intellectual property protection. Intellectual property protection is something the Chinese government already really wants to move forward on and has been moving forward on. But so far, there has been less clarity than perhaps could have been about exactly what's going to happen. Also, the key challenge in most legal aspects inside of China is not laws per se, but it's implementation of laws. And so...
And that takes time.
Of course it takes time, and so it won't happen immediately, but a commitment that there will be more uniform implementation of laws, I believe, would be one step that might possibly be able to come out.
All these things, I think, are strategic, but the immediate thing is how to balance the trade. Or is it possible to balance the trade?
I think it's impossible. I think it's impossible.
But
I think
can they reach any kind of a mini deal that can narrow the gap in any way?
As you said, optics. What Donald Trump and his administration looks for is optics for the midterm elections.
For example, what can China do? Buy American stuff? Sell less to America?
You can't sell less to America because you can't tell the American companies not to buy from China. Can you imagine if Apple said, sorry, we won't make iPhones in China anymore? Can you say that? You know, what happens then?
That will upset the global value chain.
Not only that, Apple goes bankrupt. So you can't really tell American companies not to buy Chinese products. To tell the Chinese to buy more products from the U.S., sure, if you don't have so many restrictions on what we can buy, we could be buying a lot more. But you have all these restrictions.
I still don't see what can happen to narrow
what
the
can
trading
happen?
balance.
What can happen is he can cite some of the things which President Xi had announced, opening up the financial markets, the services sector, and so on and so forth.
And these can be made more specific, just to jump in, rather than simply saying we're going to open it up, being more concrete about where this is going to happen.
That's right.
I think one of the real challenges is that so far there's been a lot of talk about the trade gap, okay? You can't sort of demand, as you say, you can't demand this shrinks. What you can do is you can create conditions that facilitate it to shrink, and that's what needs to happen.
But the political will is already there. What kind of specific measures in terms of opening up finance and services can be elaborated?
So for example, being more serious about allowing foreign banks to be doing consumer banking as well, with less Chinese involvement. Retail banking. Also, perhaps greater flexibility in the credit card markets. These have been two areas that have been
And what else?
I think that the two things that you talked about are already they're very specific things coming out of the Boa Forum, which were already announced, quite specific. Automobiles. I just don't see many people in China.
What Trump complained about.
Sure,
25%
but I
tariff.
don't see many people in China or in Europe, for that matter, are in love with American vehicles.
But also the American automakers, they don't complain doing business here in China.
They don't. They're making a mint. General Motors sold more cars in China than the United States.
They're on the right track.
And what about duty, if you talk about auto duties, what about Japan? It's 39%, not 25%. So I think so many of these things are really, really irrational. And it's just optics. It's just a big show. Anybody who's actually studied this in depth and look at this seriously sees it's so absurd. Now, just to continue on your point in terms of being more specific, Donald Trump can come out and declare, because of our pressuring, we got the Chinese to do this and this and this and this. Maybe that's enough.
I think I want to pin you down on this, because the Chinese is already maintaining, yes, we will open up even further, but on our own terms, with
at
our own
pace.
timetable.
That's right.
Not because we're bound to the pressure from the outside. Is this what's happening?
I think it is partially what's happening. They have plans, since the 19th Party Congress, there have been a lot of plans on opening up anyway. So you move up the schedule by 6 months, by 9 months, by a year. And this is why Jong is part of the team, the head of the central bank, part of the team who's gone there. And these are probably going to be things which you expedite, you accelerate the progress, and then make Donald Trump really happy, lift the tariffs on agricultural products so that the blue states remain blue.
And another thing is that
the red states
this time around
remains red.
The dispute, especially technology companies, ZTE stuff and Huawei, make the Chinese think again about how to work with the American partners.
The whole world is thinking about how to work
whether
with
we can still rely on the suppliers
Well,
from the Americans.
Well, indeed, this is a irony, right? I mean, because if you're a Chinese company and you see the actions of the U.S. government recently, what's your reaction? Your reaction is, I want to have local sourcing of this.
Yeah.
You know, surely that's probably going to happen to some
Which
degree.
will be a big problem for both China and the U.S.
It is, but I mean, there are some steps already in place. So, you know, we've seen recently that Qualcomm is moving into production joint venture in China, so, you know, things like this probably will get accelerated. And then you ask about sort of key outcomes of this. Well, you know, that could be something that could be good for both sides. We might see this joint venture, you know, move forward more rapidly.
And do you think that might be a watershed moment for China to even further expedite the process of Made in China 2025? Because obviously Americans are not reliable. We have to develop our own technology if we don't want to be bound.
I have to say, though, I was on the board of Applied Materials for 7 years. I was chairman of the investment committee as well. Chips are not that easy.
It won't happen overnight.
It won't happen overnight. Making chips, the manufacturing machinery that's required to make it takes generations of expertise, and it just won't happen that quickly.
So this kind of cooperative relationship cannot be let go.
It's more than collaborative or cooperative. I think the key is we have a global supply chain. You do what you do best. Everybody, of course, will try to improve a little bit and increase what they can do. But that global supply chain is in place, and we'll shift a little bit here, a little bit there. Maybe India will come up a bit and so on. But it's not individual countries anymore.
But I think actually your point is really important here, and that is that there's been too much focus on, you know, can we sort of do more? And I mean, there is going to be probably a little more independence from China after actions from the U.S. and maybe vice versa as well. But, you know, the economy is very integrated now, and it's much more integrated than it's ever been historically, and that's not going to change. China and the U.S. just have to be, you know, trading and cooperating, and that's going to continue on. You look at, for example, what Harvard business professor Michael Porter says with trying to suggest, you know, that you should have clusters in certain industries. And he makes the strong point that there's not a best industry to be in for, you know, the whole world. There's a best industry for a country, you know, given their particular things. So maybe China, which is really good for a variety of reasons with online payment systems, is going to expand.
But do you think the American administration
They don't see that. They don't
understand it? This is an integrated economy. We cannot let go that easily.
Well, it doesn't seem to be the rhetoric that Trump is putting forward, and we have seen some economic advisors leave. But I think there are plenty of other people. We've seen, for example, a letter from the majority of major economists, including many Nobel Prize winners in the U.S., suggesting that the world is integrated and this is not a good approach. We should learn something from the 1930s.
But the problem is that Trump and his economic team do not listen to that.
I guess what my hope is that, again, some of this is optics, and that hopefully there will be a little bit of moving back and listening to some of the other parties. And we have seen, in many things before, that you start out with an exaggerated position and you end up with a compromised position. Let's hope that may happen.
If he is transactional, he will finally back down and
make a deal.
Some kind of a deal.
Yes, he'll make a deal. He likes making deals.
And still, people say, behind this kind of a trade dispute, there is still the deficit of trust of each other strategically, because Americans believe the Chinese are going to catch up and replace us and be dominant.
I don't think it's a deficit of trust. It's just China came up too quickly, frighteningly so. I mean, the speed at which, for example, total manufacturing capacity by the end of this year, global manufacturing capacity, China's equivalent now to US, Japan, and Germany added together. China just came up so fast.
But
they worked hard.
has been developing faster in the previous decade.
That's right. They worked hard. The Chinese people work hard, and they're very, very smart, and they try harder. But I think it's just all of a sudden, the U.S. has found, or all of a sudden has discovered, oh my goodness, they reached this level. This is pretty scary.
I very much agree with you that I do think it's not so much trust, it's a surprise. I also think, though, there's a lack of understanding. So, for example, of how China works and of intent and what's going on, and there's sort of conspiracy theories often in the U.S. for people not understanding. So let me give you one concrete example. So from 2011 to 2015, I was Dean of University of Nottingham Business School in China, in Ningbo. And before I came, I admit I had less understanding about China as well. One of the things I thought is that, people were going to be like following me around and trying to influence what I was doing and things like this. This never happened. I mean, I never had anyone trying to influence me from the Communist Party or something like this, yeah?
And do you think we will understand each other better down the road?
I think that, we can hope that at least there's discussion, right? I mean, it's good that they're having these trade meetings. So first it was 2 days in Beijing, now we have 4 days in Washington. Dialogue does help. Will there be perfect understanding from a couple days of meetings? No. But we need more interaction of people from China and the U.S. and
I'm actually quite pessimistic about that. Because when you have the director of the FBI says that it's a societal challenge and every Chinese student who comes should be seen as a potential spy.
But in the end,
anti-Chinese feeling
in the end, do you think a new balance will be created?
There will be continuing shifting of balance. And that new balance, I think in 10 years and 15 years, will be a multipolar world.
Okay. We're running out of time. Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you very much.
And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Goodbye.